The past, far from disappearing or lying down and being quiet, has an embarrassing and persistent way of returning and haunting us, unless it's in fact been dealt with adequately. Desmond Tutu, recipient of Nobel Peace Prize 1984. The Path to Justice.
Since his demobilization, Mr. Ho Hui Hao has shared with his diligent wife the burden of domestic chores and poor livelihood in their native land of Zholing, Guangxi province. Although Hao fought many the years in the area sprayed with U.S. Agent Orange, his children have grown normal. Yet, the evil effects of toxic dioxin affected his grandson, who is paralyzed. Mr. Lai Van Hang was also demobilized long ago. He is earning his living on the piece of land inherited from his parents in Taibing province. Here, like in other peaceful rural areas of Vietnam, the war wound has not yet healed.
We have for 16 years kept our child in this cage. Otherwise, she would have crawled everywhere, even down to the pond, and would have put into her mouth everything she caught.
During the past 16 years, the weight of this over 20-year-old girl has never exceeded 16 kg. Mr. Nguyễn Đức Quang is now over 60 years old. When young, he fought on the battlefields of Chi Thiên and Quảng Nam, where the U.S. Air Force sprayed the greatest quantity of Agent Orange. Mr. Quang's daughter, Nguyễn Thị Vân Anh, was born in 1978, paralyzed and mentally retarded. She has been unconscious for 20 years now. Sometimes she suffers from fits of convulsion. Dioxin may cause several different diseases to a person. We are not yet fully aware of its terrible consequences. How old are you? 16 years old. What do you suffer from? I am affected by Agent Orange. How do you know that? When my father took me to medical doctors, they said that I am infected with Agent Orange. Professor John Major Stellman and his colleagues at Columbia University in the USA published an article in the issue 422 of the magazine Nature on 17th April 2003. According to them, between 1961 and 1971, the U.S. Armed Forces sprayed about 80 million liters of toxic chemicals over the mountain and rural areas of South Vietnam. Agent Orange constituted 61% of the total, containing 366 kilograms of dioxin. Millions of Vietnamese were exposed to U.S. toxic chemicals. About 3 to 4 million are now Agent Orange victims. There are many families where 3 to 4 children are affected by dioxin. There is even a family with 7 victims of this terrible toxic substance. Dioxin is the most toxic chemical known to humankind. A city with a population of 7 to 8 million would be totally killed by just 80 grams of dioxin diluted in the water supply. The effects of dioxins are grave and long-lasting. They include abnormal births, cancers, innate acantha, diabetes, and disorders in the reproductive, nervous, immune, and endocrine systems, as well as other malformations. The worrisome fact is that dioxin victims are now found even among the third generation. Vietnam has requested many times that the U.S. should cooperate in dealing with the consequences of the toxic chemicals. In 2000, during his visit to Vietnam, President Bill Clinton expressed his concern over the effort to search for the remnants of U.S. military men in this country. Chairman of the Vietnam Red Cross, Professor Nguyen Trọng Nhân, handed over a petition with 3 claims.
First, assistance to Agent Orange victims. Second, cleanup of the contaminated areas. And third, cooperation for research on solutions to preventing the effect of dioxin.
In his reply to the message, President Bill Clinton wrote that,
I agree with the need for scientific research and joint humanitarian efforts between our 2 nations.
Yet, with the ending of his office, victims of Agent Orange in Vietnam and their association have started suing the U.S. chemical companies which manufacture the toxic substances used by the U.S. Armed Forces in Vietnam.
Trong vụ kiện này, các nạn nhân chất độc da cam và hội nạn nhân đã đấu tranh không phải chỉ vì quyền lợi của riêng họ.
In this lawsuit, the Vietnamese victims of Agent Orange and their association fight for the interests of not only their own, but also for all victims, including those among war veterans in the U.S., the Philippines, Korea, Thailand, Australia, and New Zealand.
It was U.S. Admiral John Walt who made the decision to spray Agent Orange and dioxin along rivers and canals in South Vietnam to prevent the local guerrillas attacking U.S. patrol ships. A great misfortune befell his son, Captain Elmo John Walt, who was at the time commanding the patrols along the rivers in Quảng Nam, Da Nang, Kiên Giang, and Cà Mau. Elmo's son was born mentally deficient. Elmo himself died of 2 cancers in 1988. After coming back to America, John Walt wrote a book entitled My Father, My Son, on which President Bill Clinton commented as follows.
No one has done more to keep the spotlight on Agent Orange. No one knows more and has shown more what it means to take personal responsibility for our actions.
Major General Nguyễn Đôn Tự spent half of his life at the front. Now he lives peacefully in a modest and decent house. Yet the past war still echoes in his mind. After his return from the Quang Trị battlefront, Tự had a daughter born in 1973 with innate deformities. Because he was a military attaché for the Vietnamese embassy in the former Soviet Union, he was introduced to Admiral Jamwal's family. A bond of sympathy developed between the two generals who were from two front lines. In his letter to Mr. Jamwal, Mr. Đôn Tự wrote,
"The war divided us and deprived humans to some extent of humanity as the nature. Both our families are victims of the war and we share the same wounds and pains. I applaud your proactiveness in contributing to overcoming the aftermath of the war, including the effect of Agent Orange, and to improve the Vietnam-US relationship. The more proactive the Americans are, the quicker the Vietnamese can erase the hatred and obsession caused by the war."
Mrs. Nguyễn Thị Tâm from Thái Bình happened to read the open letter by Kenneth Herman, professor at New York University, which was published in the Nhân dân newspaper. The professor urged Agent Orange victims to send their files to him so that he could agitate for support among the American public. Mrs. Tâm joined the voluntary youth force in the war. Her former comrades in Thái Bình now number over 10,000. Many of them suffer from dioxin, and Mrs. Tâm has traveled through the province for the purpose of agitation among the dioxin victims. With her patients, Mrs. Tâm has collected up to thousands of files to be sent to Professor Kenneth Herman through the Vietnam Association, the Victims of Agent Orange Dioxin. Mr. Len Ardis, General Secretary of the Britain-Vietnam Friendship Society, is very active in the campaign for supporting Agent Orange victims. During his trips to Vietnam, he reserved time for visiting them.
Toxic substances were sprayed by the U.S. from 1962 and reached a peak in 1968. In the morning, they would make a mist. We would feel shivery and sneeze with tears and sore throat. After each spraying, the trees were defoliated. However, we had to keep using manioc and water taken from there as food and drink.
This is my 21st visit to Vietnam, and on each visit I've visited many of the victims of Agent Orange. And when I see, like the young daughter today of this family, I become even more stronger in my determination to try and get justice for the victims of Agent Orange. If you want to support this daughter of this family who is a victim of Agent Orange, please sign the petition.
How many innocent people are being tormented by dioxin, and what a heavy burden their families have carried for decades now. Mrs. Nguyễn Thị Huyến from Cam Lộ, Quảng Trị is over 70 years old. As a widow, she has for 10 years now been taking care of her two handicapped daughters in the house donated by the American Vietnam Red Cross Society.
When I heard that Colin Powell was going to have an operation for the prostate cancer, I recalled the statement by President Clinton in the White House in July 1996, when he stated that people that come down who have served in Vietnam, American forces, will be entitled to compensation if they suffer from a number of illnesses, including prostate cancer. So in my letter to Colin Powell, I mentioned this, and I told him to put in his claim for compensation, having done 2 tours of Vietnam. But also to remember very, very strongly that there are thousands of Vietnamese who would have also come down with prostate cancer. But more important, their sons, because it's a man's complaint, perhaps in 40, 50 years' time, will come down and have a prostate cancer, but will not receive compensation.
Mr. Cyril Jones is the representative of the International Committee in the Friendship Village in Vietnam, a project designed by World War veterans for Agent Orange victims. In 1968, Cyril Jones was a Marine in Quang Tri. When demobilized, he went back to the US and got married. However, the couple failed twice in attempting to have children. Being aware that he was affected by dioxin, Cyril Jones took the initiative in parting from his wife. Since then, he has been living alone and decided to dedicate the rest of his life to humanitarian activities.
So now I come to Vietnam and I come to the Friendship Village because these are my children now. This is where my heart is, and I feel like as an American, I owe Vietnam a lot, and I owe these children a lot. But mostly, they give me a lot.
Many American war veterans have come back to Vietnam to take part in the effort to overcome the aftermath of the war. Mr. Chuck Searcy is one of them. He is chief representative of the American War Veteran Memorial Fund in Vietnam. This fund is carrying out a project to assist the victims of bombs and mines left in Quang Tri. When asked as a veteran on the issue of the aftermath of the Agent Orange, Mr. Chuck Searcy said,
And I think until we look at both the problem of landmines, UXO, and the problem of Agent Orange, we still are not adequately dealing with all of the consequences of the war.
The effects of U.S. toxic substances are very grave. The concentration of dioxin in Bien Hung Lake, near Bien Hoa Airport, is still relatively high. Importantly, dioxin may cause harm to genes, and this peril will not stop at the 3rd generation of human as we see today. Countless Vietnamese victims of U.S. toxic chemicals and their families are tortured by wounds day and night. Meanwhile, the U.S. neglects cooperation with Vietnam in overcoming the aftermath of the war. Mr. Phan Công Bing's family is accommodated by his younger brother in a poor corner of Ho Chi Minh City. The care of the brother and other relatives has helped Mr. Bing get over his burden of guilt of having served in the U.S. Army of South Vietnam.
Từ năm 1972 đến năm 1975, tôi có tham gia vào chính quyền của chế độ Sài Gòn cũ, ngành không quân.
I served in the army of the Saigon administration from 1972 to 1975. I transported supplies for the Air Division 6 at Phu Quoc Airport. I carried toxic chemicals from the store to the aircraft for spraying. I got infected with the Agent Orange at that time, so later my two children were born with deformities.
He sells coal to earn a living. After a hard working day, he comes back to take care of his disabled children. They are beautiful human beings who cannot be neglected. The Mai Giang Vũ couple had 7 children. Agent Orange affected 3 of them. Despite the devoted care of the parents, 2 of them died at the age of 23, and the third could not survive beyond the age of 25. Mr. Vũ was drafted into the Saigon Army in 1968 after the training courses in aviation techniques in the U.S. He became a sergeant and took part in many flights for spraying Agent Orange over the central and southern parts of Vietnam.
Tôi năm nay 69 tuổi rồi. Tôi vẫn ám ảnh tất cả những cái việc tôi làm.
I'm now 69 years old. I am haunted by the consequences of my past actions on my family and myself. My 3 children have died. I beg the families of victims like mine to understand and pardon me for what I did against my will. After 30 years of resentment, now I demand that the corporations who manufacture the toxic substances accept their responsibility and compensate all Vietnamese victims like us.
The Peace Village under Tu Dụ Hospital in Ho Chi Minh City was built with the initial assistance from the International Peace Village in Germany. It is truly a cozy roof for children with deformities caused by the aftermath of war, particularly by Agent Orange.
Hỏi mà biết đi đường nào. Đâu con bơi đâu.
The lawsuit brought by the Vietnamese victims is not aimed at only material compensation. It also demands the U.S. to join the effort to deal with the consequences of the chemical war in Vietnam and to prevent it from future generations of Vietnamese. This demand is all the more urgent when victims are also found among the third generation. Professor and Dr. Nguyễn Thị Ngọc Phượng, Director of Tu Dụ Hospital, says,
Dù là cố gắng hết mức, nhưng mà do cái số nạn nhân và số
despite our great efforts, we can't accommodate the huge number of victims of Agent Orange and deformed children, born of people affected by this toxic chemical. So we assist other provinces in establishing centers for the affected children. Mr. Len Aldis has launched a website calling for people to sign the petition of Agent Orange victims. Up to now, millions of signatures have been collected from all social strata around the world. This pain must be shared. We should not be insensitive to the suffering of our fellow human beings. Generosity and mutual help can ease the mental wound of millions of victims who, no matter what, still have to bear the incredible burden of daily life. No compensation can heal the wounds, but justice must be done, and human rights have to be respected.
There's a lawsuit going by several Vietnamese in the USA against the major chemical companies. This has been a long time coming, and it's not too soon. A few of us veterans received some compensation. Now it's time for the Vietnamese to be recognized for the damage done over here, and they receive compensation. We're already in the third generation of children now, and it needs to be stopped.
The lawsuit is against the companies that made Agent Orange. But I believe that the U.S. government as well should take some responsibility for requesting this dioxin product from the American companies. It's time, I think, that we accepted the responsibility for the use of Agent Orange in Vietnam.
I want to emphasize at the very beginning that win or lose, this lawsuit has aroused worldwide opinion. A public debate, an international debate has begun, and it's going to go on for some time. And it's awakened not only the atmosphere on the internet, but also awakened the conscience of many, many people around the world. And I hope very much it will awaken the conscience of those responsible for the crimes they did in the use of the chemical warfare of Agent Orange on Vietnam.